Perfect.
By the way, nice to meet you. You have been...
Oh, that's right. You haven't met, sorry.
You have been a constant presence in my life for years now with this list. And
well, thank you.
So I feel like I know you. And you've never met me. I don't even know if you've ever heard me before. So it's nice to meet you.
It's very nice to meet you. I am thrilled to be here. I am constantly I'm just overjoyed at how useful this like weird little passion project has turned out to be for people.
Well, one of the things
when Conrad talked about how amazing it is, like, yeah, I know.
One of the things, and that can have been our kind of soft launch of the conversation, but one of the things that I thought that's unique about the three of us is in different ways we all kind of look forward, and recording this at the time of year when everybody's doing this is the best of the stuff that happened all year. I like that we're all kind of forward looking people when it comes to books and everything, and that we're getting together to prep everybody for another fantastic year. So that makes me happy.
So, it's, publishing is when you work in publishing or adjacent to publishing, it's such a forward looking position at, kind of by default, if you're working on books, either as an author or as a publishing professional, even as a bookseller, you're looking down the road, like at least a few months, if not a couple years. So it is always sort of, when I was on Talking Scared to do my sort of best of 2023, I really had to go back and be like, oh God, what did I read? Because I'm always thinking like, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
And one of the books I know Emily's going to talk about, like I read back in October, right? Like the books that are coming out January through May that I'm going to talk about, I've already read and reviewed.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, for sure.
And I think about that too, because often we read stuff so far ahead, and you have to think to yourself, did that come out this year? When, so there's a little bit of like time shifting when it comes to really just remembering what happened when. But hopefully, I know that you two are very valuable to people who want to discover books. Hopefully I make a little bit of an impact as well.
Oh yeah.
So, all right. So, for listeners who've been listening to us kind of, just chatting a little bit, this episode is actually, this episode wasn't my idea, first of all. And that shows you how much I respect Becky, because Becky basically sent an email and was like, we're doing this. And I was like, yes, let's do this. So this was Becky's idea, to do basically a look forward episode, looking forward into the 2024 horror preview. I think that's going to actually be the title of it. And so Becky said, I have this idea. I said, duh, thanks for even wanting to include me. And here we are. And it's all centered around, one of the most valuable resources for upcoming horror probably that's ever existed. And that's, Emily, that's your 2024 new books list. I think I maybe named it right. So let's start out by before I dive into that though, we'll do a quick intro to both of you. And then I'm going to ask Emily why the hell you chose to do this. So, Becky, if you want to just quickly introduce who you are.
Yep.
and what you do.
My name is Becky Spradford. I'm a librarian in the Chicago suburbs. I train librarians all over the world on how to match books with readers through the local public library. But in this space, I am also the lead horror librarian out there in the world. I have 3 editions of my book, The Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror. And I review horror for Booklist, and I am the horror columnist for Library Journal, among other things. So that's what I do. I'm reading ahead. I'm reviewing so that libraries can add books to their collection before they come out.
And you're just the best. So there's also that. You forgot to mention that. I'll add that on there.
That's true. Becky is objectively the best.
I actually love that Rob lives near me and that Emily lives near where my kid goes to college. So I do actually get to see both of you in real life, which is wonderful so nice as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Becky also has the, I think, unique honor, if you want to call it that, of having been on all of the podcasts that I have hosted.
Oh yeah, maybe we
Yeah.
met back on the Queen Mary. Yeah,
Yeah. Back in 2017. I think you're the only person yet that's been on my original podcast, the one I did with Lit Reactor, and know this. So
there we go. Look at that.
Yeah. So thank you for coming up with this. I know we're going to have an awful lot of fun talking about upcoming books. Now, Emily, if you don't mind introducing yourself, and then I'll interrogate you with a very important question after that.
Absolutely. So my name is Emily Hughes. I worked in the publishing industry for about a dozen years, splitting my time between editorial and sales, and then ultimately ending up in marketing. For the last 8 or so years of that span of employment, I worked at Penguin Random House and then at Tor Books. And for Penguin Random House, I ran their consumer-facing sci-fi fantasy vertical, Unbound Worlds. And then for the last few years of my time with Tor, I was running a very similar website specifically for Tor Nightfire, their horror imprint. I also, God, I don't know. I write short form, digital nonfiction stuff. I have my own book coming out next year. It's called Horror for Weenies. It is a 101 guide to the horror movie canon for people who don't like to be scared. That's coming out in September with Quirk. And God, what else? I don't know. I don't work in publishing anymore. Now I'm just some guy, but I really still love talking about books, and no one will ever stop me from doing that.
No one ever should. If they tried, I feel like there would be an army of people stopping them. So then that brings us to the question. This episode was based on the idea of, you have this list that you put together that basically states it's a very comprehensive list of horror books coming out in a given year. So how did that start? And what was the genesis of that? And what compels you to do that? Because it seems like it's a lot of work. So yeah, what's the story with it?
The story is that I'm insane. The story is that in 2019, when I was getting the Nightfire site up and running, it was very important to me that site be publisher agnostic. I didn't just want to talk about Nightfire books, because that would be very difficult since there were very few of them at that point. But also because Unbound Worlds had been a publisher agnostic site, and that to me was really sort of foundational to building trust with readers. Like, if readers know that you're just going to be talking to them as like a promotional machine, like, that's not going to land, right? But if we could establish ourselves in sort of in a similar way that, Tor.com has, as a central repository and, community for fans and authors and publishers, that is how you, in my opinion, build a, lasting brand. And so I started doing that for the Nightfire site in 2020, which was in large part because I was like, all right, I need to know what's coming out. And there is no existing version of this list. I can cobble together some ideas from retailer websites, from publisher websites, but it's always this, it's this absolutely infuriating patchwork of, do they have it listed as horror? Do they have it listed as dark fantasy? Is it a thriller? Is it, there are any number of like weird little categorization quirks that make it difficult to track these things down. And obviously, like, trying to find anything on Amazon is an exercise in frustration, and bookshop.org wasn't really up and running at the time, and even now, like, you can't it's the discoverability isn't great. barnesandnoble.com, don't even get me started. So I started making myself a spreadsheet, and then I thought, well, this is really useful, but like this will be useful to other people as well. Why don't I make this a post? So I made it a post on the website, and it within a month became our most trafficked piece of content on the website. And I was like, oh, people really like this. And, you know, I was getting people in the comments and people on social media going, this is so useful. Oh my God, where has this been all my life? And I kept going. And in 2020, I was still sort of nailing down my like search criteria. You know, how do I pull together this list? How do I make sure I'm getting, you know, indie pub books and stuff that's not necessarily categorized as horror? And I've really refined my technique since then. And I've published this every year. So 2020, 2021, and 2022 were all on the Nightfire website. They're still there. You can go back and look at them. And I encourage you to do so, actually. It's a great way to find stuff that is no longer in like the publishing promotional cycle. 2023 and 2024 are both up on my website, readjumpscares.com. When I left my job at Nightfire, partially just because of burnout and partially because I was about to write a book, I went, hey, I really want to take this project with me. And they were like, absolutely, this is a great resource. So I've been maintaining that on my website, and I've gotten better at gathering that information. I have a Google form that's linked on the list, you know, where you can tell me about a book I missed. People tell me, you know, by Instagram DMs, well, Twitter, not anymore because I'm not on Twitter anymore, but it was getting a little hard to keep track. So I just made a form. I was like, all right, we're gonna streamline this. So it is an insane thing to do, and it is a lot of work, but I find it extremely gratifying. And knowing how many people use it and rely on it, it just kind of gives me the strength to, you know, soldier on, because it is a significant amount of work. Yeah, I hope that was not an overly long answer to that question, but hopefully a comprehensive one.
Yeah. I don't really know exactly. I don't remember exactly when I stumbled upon the list. You know, it's probably just like people on social media sharing off like, hey, check this out. But the moment I saw it, I was like, oh, come on. Like, and obviously one of my first thoughts was like, where's the one for, you know, mystery and thriller? Where's the one for literary fiction? Because, whoa, talk about taking a lot of the work out of me trying to figure out what to care about. Like it's invaluable. And, you know, like, I'm sure that it, you know, Becky, for being someone who, your whole purpose is getting information to people, more or less. I'm sure you probably feel the same way.
Yeah, and it's funny because, you know, I use Edelweiss a lot to look for new books, which I have access to because I'm a librarian. And the things Emily was saying, like I was trying to piece together, because not only was I trying to stay ahead and make sure I'm reviewing, because, you know, Library Journal and Book List are pre-pub only reviews, right? The whole point is that the library workers need to see them in time to order them and add them to their collections. So I need to know about books minimum 4 months before they're coming out. Like I have to have it read and reviewed, just because of the publishing cycle, because they're also print, right? So like my Library Journal deadlines are 2 months before, and Book List can push out till like a month before, but that's cutting it close. So when I'm searching on Edelweiss and all that, a lot of the publishers are sending me things, but they're using all those tags that Emily said that aren't horror, right? So it's really hard to find the books. And one of the other jobs I had, which Emily has made a lot easier, and I give her credit every year, is that I write a horror preview for Library Journal every July. And I need to make sure that I am seeing the full landscape and not just the main publishers who are sending me things. And so I work with Emily. We actually met last March in person, and we sat and we went through and we started talking about what's coming out the second half of the year. In March, we were sitting there and talking about it.
Oh, that was so fun.
And so fun. We just sat around a table for like 2 hours and talked about books in person. But her list is so important for that reason. for people to plan. And I know when she published the 2024, at the end of 2023, there were a lot of my library people who were like, this is so useful. Now I can plan my spending and my promotion and my, it's so useful. And that's what made me think about doing this. I was like, Rob, your whole podcast is about the advanced copies. So we were all doing our end of the year lists. Emily and I were actually going back and forth about our end of the year lists with each other via text. And I was like, we need to talk about the first half of this year, the next year.
Yeah. 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 We started talking about that. I think in October is when you originally pitched the idea. And,
because that's when my best list for library journal was due. I was already done.
But that leads me to a question for you, Becky, and probably Emily. You experienced something similar, but I know whenever I talk to Becky about books, her timing is really skewed compared to other people's, because sometimes you'll be the first person to read a book outside of maybe an editor or something like that. So just the idea of keeping track of, I read this now, maybe 4 to 12 months from now, it's going to be released. When do I talk about it? How do I kind of keep it all in my head? That has to be really complicated for you to just for me, it's oh yeah, I read that a long time ago, and now I have to try and remember what it is if I want to talk about it or whatever. But for you, logistically, right, do you figure out milestones or reminders?
So I learned how to do it. You're absolutely right, because I read it. And it depends, right? When I'm reading it for book list, I read it and I usually review it right after I finish it. And then I do put a marker in Goodreads for me mostly to say I read it with a couple notes. And I do keep written notes as well. And I type those all up in the document where I'm writing the review. So I can keep track of it. So when I talk about it, I can say those other things about it. When I'm doing it for library journal, that's almost harder because I try to review them all at once, and I'm doing 8 at once. So for example, this is a great question right now because we're recording this at the end of 2023. And on January 2nd, my January column for library journal is dropping. And I'm going to talk about some of those books today. Those books, I turned in those reviews before Thanksgiving. So you're absolutely right. I have to remind myself. But the good news is I'm being paid to write my thoughts down, right? Not just read it. So I do have a way I capture the appeal of the story, not as much as what happens, so that I can do it. But you're absolutely right. When the reviews come out, I'm normally starting to talk about them. So when I come back on July, we're talking about July. When I come back on January 11th from vacation, I have my giveaway every week for librarians, and I'm giving away The Angel of Indian Lake because that's in my January column, right? So I have an arc. I'm going to give it away. Then I'll talk about it again when it comes out because I actually have a second one, and I'll give that away then. But one of the books that Emily's going to talk about that's coming out in January is one of my favorite books for 2024 already. And I reviewed it in October, and I already gave that arc away in October when the reviews came out. So yeah, it is some books I don't talk about when they come out. I'm only talking about them before. It's hard. And I forget book pub days. I forget what day they're publishing.
Yeah. Well,
that honestly, the list has been, it was also a way because I have ADHD and just atrocious object permanence and short-term memory, right? So I'm one of those people, if you ask me at a party, what are you reading? What's the last thing you read that you really liked? Suddenly my brain is like, book? What's a book? I've never, what, I'm not familiar with the concept. So keeping lists is really just my way of externalizing the memory stuff that my brain is not good at. So when I read something, I always log, and I started a Goodreads account 1,005 years ago, and I still use it, but I hate it because Goodreads is terrible. Yep. I do just have a physical reading journal now that has been sort of invaluable. And then when it comes time to talk about books that I read, months or possibly years before, I usually try to do it around publication date when I can. if it's something that I really want to give a boost to, I will do like lead up stuff on social media, especially for books that I really love. One of the books I'm going to be talking about today is one of those. I've just every few weeks or like once a month, I'm like, hey, you should pre-order this book. It's brilliant. But yeah, trying to talk about stuff around pub date is probably the most useful for the authors in question, because first week sales are so important to authors, and pre-orders count towards first week sales, which is why authors will always ask you to pre-order if you can. And then I really do try to keep talking about stuff after it's published, because as I said earlier, the publishing publicity cycle is really just like, that first week or two. And then it just, I have a lot of sympathy having been on the other side of it. If you're a marketer at a big 5 publisher, you're working on, I don't know, a couple dozen books a year at least. And you just don't have the time to shepherd a book, sort of, keep close focus on one book over the course of weeks or months. And that's a shame, but that's why a lot of publicity and marketing falls on authors these days. So anything we can do to help is, in my mind, just frosting. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a couple of thoughts, responses to both of you. Emily, to yours first. I think that just because, like, in preparation for the conversation we're about to have, where we talk about books that we're looking forward to, I read through, the descriptions of dozens of books on your list. And that alone, just reading the descriptions of books is huge in making me realize, oh, this is something that is right up my alley. So, like, even if people just read that list and read through what the books are, like, that's a huge first step for people. And then, Becky, I just wanted to say really quick that in conversations that we've had in the past, you do, as far as I can tell, a great job of keeping secret things that need to be secret. You've said some stuff before and you're like, I can't say XYZ. But like your enthusiasm shows like, you know what I'm saying? So you can be generically enthusiastic about something, in an embargoed kind of way so that, things don't spill and aren't supposed to be spilled. So, I appreciate that too.
Yeah.
I have a couple of quick questions before we dive into starting to talk about the titles we're excited about, which I know that's why we're here. But since I have your minds to access, I thought I'd ask a couple of quick questions that are kind of topical. And these are both for both of you. First of all, I've realized reading, podcasting, editing, posting, promoting is a lot of work. And so, like, I feel like if I read 30, 35 books a year, that's a great year. And I've just recently discovered the value of, like, how good a nice novella is. So I'm looking through your list, and just in general, like, if a novella pops up for me, like, that goes to the top of the list for me, because I can do that quickly. And that means I can get content quicker. So, like, do you pay specific attention to novellas, or is there, you know what I'm saying? Like, is there a way to call out, really selfishly, I want a list of novellas is what I'm trying to say. So any thoughts?
I'll give you a secret. So first of all, I do try to cover novellas because libraries don't always look to add them. And for exactly your reason, they're a great book to add to collections because they're quick reads. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they'll buy them also on ebook or e-audio, which is really helpful. But I will tell you, when I am building, especially when I'm doing my 8-book column, there's always at least one novella in there because I have to read 8 books. And yes, as I said, them at the same time. And I don't have to. I guess I could write them, the reviews, but I like, since they're going to appear in print on a page together, I do try to write them at the same time to be cognizant of the fact that they're being traditionally published. But there's always a novella in there, and I have a couple I'm going to talk about today.
Me too, actually. Both of my February picks are novellas.
One of my favorite things I read this year is The Crane Husband by Kelly Barnhill. And I read it in like an hour and a half, and it was just like a great experience. So there's so much value to novellas. So
I just reviewed a book that I'm not going to talk about, but it's coming out in the spring. It's called What Happened at Sunrise Gardens, and it's Nate Southern, and it's coming out from Cemetery Dance. And it was a very cool reading experience.
nice.
I just turned in the review on Tuesday for Book List because the book takes place over about an hour, and it takes just about an hour to read.
Ooh,
And it was
nice.
really awesome.
That's cool.
So
Emily,
in terms of the list, I don't get into like format or length or category in the list just because it's already so much work. The copy the information I include on the list for any of your listeners who haven't been to my site: title, author, pub date, publisher. And then I usually do a paragraph or so of synopsis, and I always take that from the publisher's copy. Except in 2020 on my very first list, I would sort of rephrase and describe each book in my own words. And that was so much extra work that I was like, I can't do that again. But I do try to note, if I think the publisher copy is missing something significant that I think readers might want to know, like, is it a novella? Is it, the second in a series? Is it YA? Because I add YA titles on my list as well. I will usually try to work that in somewhere. So if you Control F novella on the list, it's not going to catch all of them maybe, but it should catch most of them.
Awesome. That's a good tip because like halfway through the 2023 I was like, man, I could get a few more episodes in if it was just like more novellas on my list. So all right, so excellent insight, more than I thought might have been there. The other quick question that I had for both of you is, I feel like I was talking to a friend of mine, his name's Jesse, and we were talking about what's coming out in 2024. And it feels to me like there is kind of like an unofficial kind of like blockbuster season where like publishers will drop the bigger, more known names at a certain time of year. And I don't know if that's like just a feeling or if there's any truth behind that, but it seems
there is
like
truth. I'll let Emily talk about it.
July, maybe June, July through like
right now though
September.
It's like May, July, and then the fall.
The
fall. But Emily,
so this tracks a lot to when people are buying books and when those books are likely to get more attention. With horror specifically, obviously, publishers tend to gravitate towards the autumn, which drives me up a fucking wall, excuse my French, because people who read a specific genre don't just read it in one season, right?
Yeah.
And I think, God, this year alone, there were almost 100 titles on my list that came out in October. And I was like, guys, we got to space this out.
Yeah.
But more generally in publishing, awards season is at the end of the year. And that's also when people are buying gifts. So it's usually, peak season as it is for many, product manufacturers, retailers, creatives. But there's also that sort of spring to summer transitional season when publishers are trying to get into beach reads, basically summer reading and beach reads. People are going on vacation. They have a little more time. Maybe they're, taking a break with their kids while school's not in session. So it definitely does tend to coalesce, like the big books tend to coalesce around those two periods of time. And this is largely a matter of publishing just sort of getting in its own way, as it so often does. Again, like, of course, there are certain books that you want to time to certain dates, right? There are I mean, it happens less in publishing, although one of the books I'm going to talk about that's coming out in May is a queer horror novel. Well, actually, two of the books I'm talking about are queer horror novels that come out in May and June, respectively. And so, you might want to time those to Pride. That makes a lot of sense. But, for your sort of, for your new book that doesn't have any specific date hook, publishers are just kind of like, sometimes it depends on, because publishing operates in seasons, and a lot of publishers have 3 seasons, some have 4, some have 2. And that really just means we're calling everything that's coming out from this date to this date summer or winter or fall or whatever. And that just sort of makes it easier for sales reps to go to accounts and being like, I'm selling winter, I'm selling summer, so that they can sort of break the year up into chunks. But what then happens is that, books try to, editors and publishers will try to rush a book into a particular season if they think it needs to be, this has to be a big summer book. We're positioning this one as a big book, so we want it to be, out in time for, X date. And that, I could talk about this for another hour, like uninterrupted. So I'll stop there, but it's not your imagination. It really is happening, and it really is deeply irritating.
Well, I'm just shocked to learn that publishers aren't scheduling books to come out for podcasters like me to like do them regularly scheduled intervals. I don't know why they hadn't thought of that. Seems obvious to me.
Really, it's a vast oversight.
Yeah. I got to talk to Mr. or Mrs. Tor or whoever. That's my dumb thing. When I don't know the name of someone who runs a company, I just make their name the name of the company.
No, I'm pretty sure that's legally how it works.
Yeah. That's good.
No, she's been there.
That's true. So, all right. So the format of probably what's going to be the remainder of the conversation, unless I come up with any other quick questions that are relevant, is going to be that we're just going to basically go around and talk about books that we're looking forward to in the first half of 2024. I'm assuming we'll just kind of alternate who's talking. And since it's the first time, we have a loose format where basically we each chose some from each month and we're going to talk about them. I am just going to defer to the experts on you guys know a lot more than me, so I won't have as many books to talk about as the two of you. But we'll go around and we'll start in January. We'll make our way to June and see how this goes. So is anybody really passionate about starting out one of their picks for January?
I would love Emily to talk about her first one.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So my first book is This Wretched Valley by Jenny Kiefer. I think that this is the one that Becky was talking about. That's one of her favorites of 2024 already. This book, oh my God, this book is wilderness horror, survival horror done unbelievably well. And it's Jenny's first novel. It's her debut. Jenny is also the owner of Butcher Cabin Books in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a horror, thriller, mystery focused bookstore. So if any of you are ever in that area, drop in, say hello, pick up some great reads. Jenny is, I'm really like a little bit in awe of her and a little scared of her after reading this book. It's loosely inspired by the Dyatlov Pass mystery, which was a group of Russian hikers, 75 years ago, who went out on like a cross-country skiing trip and were discovered dead, weeks later in very mysterious and upsetting circumstances. Like the tent had been cut open from the inside, and a bunch of them were naked in the snow, and one of them had their tongue was missing, and it's one of those enduring mysteries that has, captured people's imaginations in a particularly macabre way. And Jenny went, okay, let's do that, but let's set it in the like sort of rural Appalachia, and let's have it be about a rock climber who finds an unscaled rock face, and she's trying to get endorsement deals with major athletic brands. So she's building her Instagram presence, and she's like, all right, I've found this rock face with the help of a friend doing some like terrain mapping, and I'm going to go climb it, and I'm going to be the first person to climb this rock face and, blaze all the trail. I don't know shit about rock climbing, but I knew a lot more after reading this novel, which is great.
Yep.
And Jenny, I believe, is an avid rock climber as well.
Yes.
So things start going very wrong very quickly. And it turns out this rock face is in a patch of forest that the locals kind of know to avoid because nothing good happens there. If you go in, you likely don't come back out. And that's a real, another one of the books I'm talking about later has that kind of same trope of the forest that eats you, which is absolute catnip to me. And this is, it's got a little bit of like Alma Katsu's The Hunger in it, which is one of my faves. It's her Donner Party novel.
Oh, yeah.
It is nasty. This book is nasty. It is mean, and I fucking love it. The Dog Lives, which is actually part of their marketing campaign for it, which is important information for me personally. There is a very good dog who does survive, even though pretty much nobody else does. This also has one of the best first chapters I've read in a long time. It hooked me in a way that I have not really been able to shake.
Good news for Neil McRobert too, who will talk at length about his love for dogs. So,
yes.
I'm going to point out before we move on to another one, and obviously Becky's probably going to have some thoughts on this book too. I decided, but forgot to mention, I'm going to make a bookshop.org list of all the stuff that we talk about, so that if anybody's listening to this, I'll link it in my Substack post so that it's easy to find all the books that we talked about.
And no, and I'm not going to share more about that book because I want us to get through as many as possible. And I have already printed a star review of this book in Library Journal, which anyone can read for free because it's star. So I'm going to talk about my book, though, which is a little bit off the beaten path. So it is called Womb City, and I practice saying the author's name. It's Tolo Tomasi. I went on, I have to say that's one of my pet peeves when people don't take the time to learn how to say authors' names.
I agree.
So I did take the time, and I apologize. Any mistakes are mine. This is a critically acclaimed Botswanan author, which I didn't know what that meant when I started reading this book, but that's a person from Botswana. So this is a strong debut, and it combines African futurism and revenge horror, which is very cool. Two things I really liked. And it follows the story of Nella. She's a woman living in a near future Botswana where crime, especially murder, is not existent. But that's only because most people have a microchip that monitors their behavior. And what I loved about this story is that I got swept into it immediately, even as all the complicated details of the world and the characters were being relayed to me. There was confidence, and the writing was so confident that, these complicated details of the world and the character, I just followed along and trusted the author, which is a lot to expect from a debut author, but I never questioned it reading it. There's a dangerous plot with Nella's race against time. It unspools at a compelling pace because she is like one of those people. There's a microchip, and she basically has proven that she's not trustworthy and she's going to commit crimes. But it also has a lot about having babies and what it takes to have children, and people are both having babies in a futuristic way, but also people are being reborn. If you've done some crimes, you sort of get rebooted in another body. So there's all of that. So it's got great dystopian, but then there's the ghosts of the people that you possibly took over their body that are speaking through you in many ways. It's universally thought-provoking. It contemplates serious topics like AI, spirituality, bodily autonomy, grief, love, motherhood, family. What I really loved about it, and this is how I'm selling it to people. So in the marketing, because you're talking about the marketing, sometimes the marketing is not great, right? The marketing is saying this is Margaret Atwood, which I don't disagree with, but I actually think this is like if you ever thought that you loved Philip K. Dick and Blake Crouch, but you wanted them to have a lot more femininity. Now, the author is non-binary, but the main character is a woman and functions as a woman. So if you love Philip K. Dick and Blake Crouch, like I love them, but too much testosterone, this is the book for you. Also set in Africa. So like it is just a nice crossover between horror and science fiction without necessarily being space horror, which is also great, but you know, and I know Emily's read it as well.
Yeah. This one, the body hopping aspect of this book has some really interesting ramifications for gender in the world of this story. You may not, if you're ported into a new body, it may not match the gender of your original body or who you identify as. And it was so ambitious, and confident is exactly the word for it. The world building is so like, the world building doesn't get in the way of the pace, which is really important to me. Because that can be a real drag when you're like, okay, this author clearly has like a Bible for their book and they want to tell me all about it. But this was really just like, the pace is rapid fire. The character is really interesting and like not entirely likable, but like fascinating. And I don't want to like, she has this really like difficult marriage to a man who really wants to he wants her to be picture perfect so that his career will advance. And it's this really sort of insidious marital story as well. Really good. I was fascinated by it, and I can't wait to see what the author does next.
I'm going to start out with my first one by prefacing by saying I have not read any books that are coming out in 2024. So I know that you're going to probably speak from experience about at least some of the titles that you're talking about, if not all of them. I have not. And I'm starting out with The Best Horror of the Year, Volume 15 by Ellen Datlow, specifically for a couple of reasons. First of all, I feel like not enough people talk about kind of like gateway reads. And anthologies are an incredible way to have you read a little bit from an author and think, oh, I like their style, and then go deeper into, reading that author. And the other thing is, I really like Ellen Datlow. I think that she is a very good anthologist, and, for the most part, she puts together good collections of really good voices. So when it comes to finding talent and pulling it together, I feel like she's really she's one of the top in her field on that. But like, honestly, the big thing for me is for people who need to expose themselves to new authors. And that's what I've been trying to do a lot lately, is discover new voices that I haven't read before. An anthology is a great way to do it. And especially like an anthology in a series or by a person who's good at doing that stuff is just going to be a great way to open up maybe options that you didn't know about before. So that's kind of my reason for going.
I love it
with that.
Yeah, Ellen has absolutely perfected her craft. She is the expert on short speculative fiction in general, really, but especially horror. And yeah, exactly. It's like a tasting menu of new writers, people you might not have encountered before. It's a great discovery tool.
Yep. Yeah. I will. This is the first time I'm publicly admitting this. For a little while, I've been between jobs. I just recently started a new job. And between those jobs, I low key was just like a part-time guy at a Barnes and Noble. And I mastered putting out horror and stuff. And one of the things I tried to do was to highlight really useful anthologies for people who don't know about horror as a way to discover new authors. So that kind of got me on the kick of pushing short story collections and anthologies as a way to open up your mind to new voices.
I'm also a former BNN employee, so Roger.
It's made me think about some stuff, understanding, seeing how the sausage is made a little bit. So, all right, who wants to go with? Do we have more Januaries? Does anybody want to give another January one? Or
I'll
do we want to
go.
jump on?
No,
Okay.
I have another one I really want to talk about because although I live in Illinois now, I am a Jersey girl and I'm proud Jersey girl. So I'm going to talk about a book set in New Jersey, actually in the part of New Jersey that I'm from. It's called Midnight on Beacon Street and it's by Emily Ruth Verona. And I also love this book because, again, I'm going to make it all about me. It's set in 1993. That is the year I graduated high school. And it is about a high school senior. So I really enjoyed this. But this is a story that is about a town experiencing massive break-ins. And Amy is a super anxious kid. And this is a really great portrayal of anxiety. As a kid who had anxiety as well, it was very realistic portrayal of it. And I really appreciated that, the honesty in it. By the way, this is a short one too, Rob. It's a little longer than a novella, but it's super short. And what's so cool about it, so she's going to babysit for the mom she loves. She's anxious. She loves horror movies from the 70s and 80s. So like she loves Halloween and all these things because they help with her anxiety. And she learned about that from her cousin who also likes this stuff. And so she's had it for the single mom she always babysits for, Eleanor. And she's going to her house to watch Mira, the 12-year-old, and Ben, who's 6. But we know from the first page that this will not be an easy night because it's called Midnight on Beacon Street. And the story opens at midnight with Ben covered in blood. Okay. So we know this is not going to go well. And then it goes back and it's told in very short chapters that actually do move back and forth in time. And they're all headed with timestamps. So it keeps you moving. So it goes back into Emily's life, or sorry, Emily's the author, Amy's life. It's very confusing to me because my sisters are Amy and Emily. So this felt like it was my book. So Amy is going back to when she had her first babysitter and talking about that and how she became a babysitter. And it goes back and forth. It moves very quickly and it's very unnerving because you know it's going to end with the little boy covered in blood, right? Which I love. I love when an author tells you what's going to happen, but you have to keep reading. So the background details are fleshed out. The main characters anchor the story. It is only told through Amy and Ben's point of view. And sometimes that little kid point of view is not good. But in this case, it is perfect because I think Mira is a little too old, the 12-year-old. He doesn't understand everything, but we do. They are authentic narrators and they're different perspectives. Let us see all the emotions. You are going to be able to read this in like a sitting or two. I really like how it's a love letter to horror itself, but it also has that final girl's babysitter trope, like in Halloween. And I think it's like a slightly less weird, and I mean weird with the capital W, version of like The Babysitter Lives by Stephen Graham Jones. And if you liked that, you're going to really like this. It's a little more realistic based, but it has that love of horror as well.
Yeah, I haven't read this one yet, but I'm really excited about it. I have a galley, especially because of the horror movie angle, which is obviously relevant to my book. But I really like the framing and I really like the idea of, using horror both on the page and on the screen to sort of self-treat, your anxiety, which is something that I have been doing for a long time as well. So I'm excited about this one.
Yeah, when I read that one, my mind went to Babysitter Lives, but also Todd Kiesling in his collection that came out in 2023 had a story, a Black Eyed Kids story, basically that were, like it was like a babysitter situation, and everything you're feeling says don't open the door. And then things go bad. So that made me think of that too.
And it's funny because it opens with the ending, but I have not told you most of what happens, which is fascinating. And again, it's her debut novel and she pulls everything together super well so that all the details you're getting do end up mattering, not just in building the characters, but in the story. And I appreciate that as someone who reads a lot of books.
Yeah. Emily?
Well, my other January pick is one that I have not read yet. Which is The House of Last Resort by Chris Golden. That's out at the end of January. It is about, and he's really good at doing these sort of like one-off horror books in really interesting settings. And the one that comes to mind is Road of Bones from a couple years ago, which was set on a remote highway in Siberia. This one is set in a, beautiful but economically depressed Italian town where the mayor, in sort of an effort to save this, dying civic, entity is offering foreigners the opportunity to move there and buy homes for like €1, right? And this is based on, there have been like these schemes, that have sort of come into the news over the past few years. This is a thing that happens. So an American couple decide to take advantage of this because the husband's grandparents live in this town, and they figure, well, we both work remotely and we can do this without, this will allow us to be homeowners and be close to family and live in this, very different part of the world. But the problem is the house that they move into is not in great shape, let's say from a haunting perspective. And when they tell his grandparents which house they've moved into, his grandmother is furious and like frightened for them. And the other townsfolk start to kind of talk about it. And they find out that there was a like long history of the Catholic Church owning this house and priests doing something untoward in like the chapel inside. And I'm really excited about it. I love a good religious horror novel. I love a good, interesting setting that's not just sort of Anywheresville, USA. And actually, Chris Golden is going to have a one-off horror convention in January with Brian Keene in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, called the House of Last Resort Weekend. And I am going to be there, and I hope to see at least some of your listeners there. There are going to be a lot of other great authors there, and I think that's going to be fun. So this one is very shortly on my TBR because I need to read it before I get there.
I will give a quick warning. There are a lot of rats in this story as well.
Ooh, okay. I can deal with rats. I just can't deal with cockroaches.
No cockroaches, lots of rats.
Great.
Yeah, I like the stuff I've read of his. And I saw that one and I was like, all right, this is interesting. But I've been lazy the last couple of months, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it an official thing. So, well, we'll see. But yeah, Chris Golden, good stuff.
Yep.
I'm sneaking in a not horror one that's definitely not on Emily's list, just because it came onto my radar and it was just so weird. And I've read like the first like 40 pages of it and it's completely bizarre, but it's called You, Me, and Ulysses S. Grant, a farcical biography. So basically this is a guy, Brad Neely, who created this like web cartoon back in like, I think the early 2000s called The Professor Brothers, which got made into an Adult Swim cartoon. And he's been like a writer for South Park and everything. This is like just batshit crazy. So like it's a biography of Ulysses S. Grant, but I honestly could not tell you what's real and what is just made up. And the way that and I'm not going to talk long about this, but it's just so bananas. So when he goes to West Point, it's like basically chronological of his life. The title of the chapter is Kill School. So it's just a real bananas like biography, historical kind of farce kind of thing. I started reading it and I'm like, this is great. And it's going to be very entertaining. And I was going to set up an interview to do an episode of the podcast with this guy. And I was like, I can't do that. It's so weird. It's going to cook my brain. And then how am I going to talk to this guy about it? So because
You'll talk to us about it instead.
I know, because I kind of chickened out of making it an episode on the podcast. I at least wanted to acknowledge that it's out there, because if there's somebody who likes history, but from just like, I liken it to like if you took drunk history to an extreme, like it's that kind of a thing. It seems really fun. So far it's fun.
That sounds like a blast. Yeah.
So that was my cheat of not having to put two books from the list on January. So I realize you guys are so much more informed than me. And even the books that you haven't read, you have these like really thought out ways of explaining them. And I'm not going to hit that mark. So like my explanations are going to be much more basic and much more like my personal motivation than what the book is. But
I mean, look,
That is what it
Becky and
is.
I both have like long professional histories of being able to talk about books that even, books that we have read, but especially books we haven't read. And
We
that
haven't.
comes from
Yeah.
like a long history of, at least for me, being an English major and learning to bullshit my way through about things I haven't read.
It's like the job description for Reader's Advisory. I've been
Yeah.
doing this since 2000. But if we move into February, I
Yeah.
was noticing, because you were talking about, I was going to talk about both my books at the same time because it goes back to our earlier conversation. It's the shortest month, and I didn't realize I did this, but I picked 2 novellas
So
for my
did I.
February choices. I know. So I think that, I thought you did too. I looked at those. So I'm going to talk about them together because they're very different, but they're both excellent. So the first one is Your Shadow Half Remains by Sunny Moraine. They are, I believe this is their first novel, but it's a novella, so it's a debut. This is, and I'm going to talk about it quickly for both of them. It sounds like Bird Box with the setup, okay? So, or The Violence by Delia Dawson, in that it is this idea that we're sort of like mid-apocalypse. There is some kind of something that happened where you look any human, possibly animal, but definitely human, like they still don't know for sure, in the eye, you become very murderous. Like even a photograph or a painting, again, no one's really very sure. Also, our narrator, I don't really trust the narrator. It's not clearly, like, it's not set up as this is an unreliable narrator and there's a twist, but like clearly there is something going on here. And we're not getting the whole story because it's only through this one character's eyes. The character's name is Riley. They live alone on the shores of an isolated lake in a home that belonged to the grandparents before they murdered each other. And very engaging, even recounting, and this is a quote from the book, the horrifyingly banal downfall of society, which is fascinating, right? Drawing readers in with a mixture of details from then and philosophical considerations about now, gaining our trust even as the story gets less and less, Riley gets less and less reliable. So it's very creepy, obviously, for the first line, but Riley does meet Ellis on the road one day, and they dare to connect, and so they talk without looking at each other. And it is one of those sort of like Bird Box, and it's that slice of time if you only had like the Bird Box parts that are in the present of the story. This slice of life as it's happening, and there's not really a resolution, but it really is about people connecting during this time, and that whole unease of, are they good people? Are they not good people? Also, is this all true? Is this, I don't know. It was great. Like I got into this world, I was stuck in it and I didn't want to leave. And then the other novella I read, which I loved even more, is by Tim McGregor. It's called Einhollow. I love Tim McGregor's writing. Every time I read his books, I just love them. But especially his historical fiction. He wrote Heart Strange and Dreadful many years ago. This is the book you didn't know you needed. And it's short and it's near perfect. It is, I'm going to jump to the chase. It's the Bride of Frankenstein story in print, but as historical fiction. So
That's really
he
cool.
takes this, it's so cool. So he takes this, Einhollow is an actual uninhabited island in the Orkney Islands. And like, I was Googling this thing the whole time. It has literally been long considered to be haunted by trolls and finfolk. And it was home to a hardy few families in 1851. This is true. And then they all until 1851, they all mysteriously left. It's not really explained in history. It's explained in the book though. And once a year now, people are allowed to go to that island like once a year with only like supervisors. Like this is all true. So McGregor says, okay, well, I'm going to set this in 1797. And Agnes is one of only 20 people living on Einhollow. And so she is, she's caring for her children. She's avoiding her husband's wrath. She's gossiping with her pregnant neighbor. Life is really hard and lonely. Visitors are rare. So when a rich foreigner with a, weird name named Dr. Victor Frankenstein comes to hide himself away, basically he's there, this because of his name, to try to make his monster, who's very mad at him and chasing him, happy. We're told numerous times from the beginning that Agnes is very large, like overly large, and she's very, very masculine and big. Anyway, they start to work together. She ends up working for Frankenstein. It is heart-wrenching as historical fiction about like the lives of women, but it is creepy because it is based on like a real thing, and what he imagines is tragic, as of course you would probably assume, but also it makes, like, I believe it happened now because no one's allowed on that island. They're only allowed to go once a year. Like, that's what's great historical fiction does, right? The characters are amazing. The setting is so great. Like, if you like Amakatsu, for sure. If you like any retellings like Sylvia Marina Garcia, you will absolutely love this.
That's awesome. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it has a fantastic cover too. So I, as we discussed, I also picked two novellas. There's something in the water, I guess, in February. The first is What Feasts at Night, which is the second T. Kingfisher sworn soldier novella, the sequel to What Moves the Dead. And What Moves the Dead was in classic T. Kingfisher horror fashion. She had written it as sort of a reimagining of The Fall of the House of Usher, much as The Twisted Ones was sort of a response to Arthur Machen's The White People, and The Hollow Places was kind of a response to Algernon Blackwood's The Willows. This, as far as I can tell, I have not read this yet. It appears to be an original story. I was reading her sort of statement on, upon the announcement of this book, and she said, I just had so much fun writing Alex Easton, the main character, that I just wanted to stay with them. And so this is Alex Easton, having left the events of What Moves the Dead and having gone back to their home country, which is an invented country, and dealing with a moroi, which is a sort of an Eastern European vampire-ish, spirit-ish creature, who appears to sort of be stealing the breath out of sleeping people. And I just love her writing so much. There's a coziness to it, not to get into the fucking cozy horror debate, but there's a coziness to it. There's like a sweetness to it, almost like a wry sort of comfort. But then she can turn on a dime and write some of like the scariest shit you've ever seen. And I know her tone doesn't work for everybody in the horror world. People who like, really more extreme, more like sort of nihilistic stuff are not going to respond well to T. Kingfisher, but it's for me. It is very much for me. And I just think she's wonderful. And I hope she continues writing forever. The second novella is more of a dark fantasy. It's The Butcher of the Forest by Premi Mohammed. And it's a standalone novella, Tor.com. As I said earlier, there's very little I love more than, a mysterious forest that eats you. Once you go in, you don't come out. And this is the story of the only person who has gone into this forest and lived to tell the tale. And when this sort of like mysterious, nameless tyrant who is ruling this land, his children end up in the woods, and he tells her, you have to go get them because you're the only person who can do it. If you don't, I will kill you. And, so she's literally stuck between a rock and a hard place. And she has one day to go in and retrieve these children and brave the, monsters and riddles and traps and tricks of this forest. Again, I have not read this one either, but it ticks all of my boxes and I can't wait to pick it up.
It reminds me of the book I was going to talk about for March. I think, right, we're moving to March.
If Rob has any February picks.
That's right. He had February. I didn't see that. Sorry.
I have a February. Oh, looks like I chose two. There you go. Well, I might ask for some help. Have either of you read The Book of Love by Kelly Link?
Halfway through it.
So I might. All right, so basically, I'll tell you the reason I chose that one, and it's because I have not read Kelly Link before.
Mm-hmm.
However, this choice is completely on reputation because everybody I know who has raves about Kelly Link, and I feel like part of like my last few years of reading is like my atonement for missing things that like I should not have missed. And so when I hear someone talk so highly about a specific author, then I want to make that a priority. So that's the reason I chose that book. But like reading the description of the book, first of all, I believe it's her first novel. She has published previous short story collections that are acclaimed. And so that's kind of a milestone in itself. And if anybody wants a good description of it, Victor Laval, I believe, in that Talking Scared episode, talked about it and what he was looking forward to. So he does a great job of describing it. But the general gist is like these like couple of kids had gone missing, and then they find themselves, they've like reappeared like in their, I think, school. And there's basically they had disappeared and died, and there's like a bargain that they can go through to kind of like come back and be reunited with their family and resurrected and everything. But it sounds like it's probably not going to go well, is basically like my understanding. So if anybody wants to clean that up and make it sound better, but the general idea sounds cool. The page count sounds intimidating, but the author sounds like they're awesome. So that's the reason I went with it.
Yeah, Kelly is a treasure and a legend, and also just one of the nicest people in existence. I'm lucky enough to live one town over from her bookstore, Book Moon, which is a wonderful place. And I go in there, and she and or her husband Gavin are frequently in there, and we just have lovely long talks and recommend books to each other. And it's the platonic ideal of a local indie bookstore. As I said, I'm halfway through this novel, and I'm like deliberately taking my time with it because I don't want to leave the town of Love's End. It's set in this imagined town, completely unremarkable Massachusetts town. And it's three teenagers who die mysteriously and then come back about a year later, and they are brought back as sort of pawns in an ongoing power struggle between various supernatural entities. But it's really hard to describe because her writing is, I've seen it described as like idiosyncratic, and I guess that's a good word for it because nobody writes like she does. It's almost like nobody writes like George Saunders, or nobody writes like Stephen Graham Jones.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
yeah, that just like incredibly distinctive voice, and she writes with this incredible generosity. Towards her characters, towards the reader, towards God, everyone. She just is a very giving writer. And the inner lives of these teenagers are just given so much like weight and thoughtfulness and space to breathe. But like it's not sentimental at all. It's funny, and it's snappy, and it's occasionally scary and disturbing. God, there's a scene in the book where a cat who is not really a cat eats itself, starting with its tail, and then just like its mouth just sort of turns inside out and vanishes. And like, boy, that's a visual that'll stick with you for the rest of your life. But it is wonderful, and as I said, I'm savoring it because I don't want it to end. But yeah, her short fiction is just legendary, and this is her first novel, and it's her first novel after I don't even know how many short story collections, at least 4, that netted her a MacArthur Genius Grant and a Pulitzer finalist designation. So she is a real one, like unimpeachably good.
Good choice, Rob.
Better than I knew, apparently. But so that makes me think, though, that it's I haven't seen many authors start out and build up a career based on collections of short stories. Like, not a lot of names come to mind where that's the foundation that you're starting from. I mean, like, I know Brian Evanson does tons of short story collections, so that's a name that comes to mind. But I can't think of a lot, and I gotta imagine that's a hard way to try and build yourself up. So yeah.
So this happens more in, quote unquote literary fiction than it does in genre, and that's just because I think literary fiction audiences tend to be a little more receptive towards short story collections, which can be harder to market. Other names who come to mind, George Saunders, as I mentioned, did exactly this, and he's one of my all-time. I mean, he's also sort of unclassifiable. I mean, Kelly Link is not strictly a horror author, nor is she strictly a fantasy author, nor is she strictly she's like, it's almost magical realism, except that magical realism has a very defined set of criteria. It's very specifically applies to like Latin American writing. It does have that same kind of feel. It's just like the magical infecting the everyday. Whereas, George Saunders, well, I could do a whole tangent on George Saunders, but yeah, it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, and George Saunders came out with a book that's not, his first novel was not all that dissimilar to the book you were talking about, the non-horror pick from January, which was sort of a reimagining of the life, a specific episode in the life of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah. I had another quick pick that was like a last minute ad for myself for February, and I'm not going to talk much about it because this is brand new to me, but there's a book called Mewing by Chloe Spencer, and it's coming out from Shortwave Publishing. First of all, Shortwave I'm starting to like a lot. And it's a novella, so that was another reason that it like ticked a box for me. But it's very modern. Like, it's someone who wants to be a successful influencer wants to join this like well-known group of like influencers, and tries to ingratiate herself with like the leader of this group, and things go bad. And I even looked up the term mewing is an actual, do you guys know what that is? Apparently it's when you press your tongue against the top of your mouth in order to like give yourself better jaw structure or something like that. It's like it's like a self-beautification. Like,
my Gen Z children were just talking about this yesterday.
Yeah. So that's the title of this book.
21 and 18-year-old.
Yeah. So I'm feeling like, because of that, I got a much modern, like new culture kind of feel from that. And that's something that like I love to see tapped into, and I'm hoping that it taps into it in a good way, where because like I've had conversations with so many authors that are like, I don't know how to write technology. I don't know how to write, like modern stuff. And so that's why I set my stuff in the 80s. And so I like to see people exploring things that are newer and fresh, and see how they can use that to their advantage. So I got hope for this book.
Excellent. Yeah,
so
that sounds
I have
great.
a fun one. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I have a fun one for March that I was excited about. And then when it actually pans out, I get even more excited. So it's the new Gwendolyn Keist, The Haunting of Velkwood. This is how I'm telling people, because I don't want to give too much away about this either. But first of all, if you liked the Rust Maidens, it's like the Rust Maidens all grown up. And I say that knowing that in the Rust Maidens, there is a timeline where the characters are grown up. But this is like, if the characters in the Rust Maidens grew up, the main character, and could like write the story, a more mature story, this is it. It's basically like an X-Files episode. Okay. So this entire neighborhood, like a real thing, somewhere in a very not specific, but like the exurbs, like outside the suburbs, right? This one neighborhood that was built, like just the one block got built and the rest of the neighborhood didn't get built, disappears. And it doesn't just disappear. Like, this is a known thing that the world watched happen. It's like behind a veil, and people can like see it fuzzy, but no one can go into it. And so it's like 20 years later, so people are sort of over it, even though it still exists, right? Like, they're over it. It was just such a cool thing. Like, but here's the thing. happened, the day it happened was a Monday morning. The night before, three girls who go to college left to go back to college from spring break, and they're the only three survivors. So the main character is the one that, and you can imagine this has really screwed them up. Like the main character is, her name is Talitha, and the other girls are Brett and Grace. And Talitha and Brett were very, very close. And Grace was their friend as well, but her like fiance was left behind back there, like the boy she was going to marry. Talitha's little sister's left behind. Had a very complicated relationship with her family, with her stepdad, or I don't know if they were married, but like it was like not her real dad. Anyway, these girls left, and there's one other girl their age who stayed behind. And basically, Grace at one point went and was gone and came back. Talitha is not doing well. She's like in her 40s, not doing great. And researchers, like paranormal researchers who are writing like papers on this, are asking her to go back. So she goes back, and that's all I'm going to talk about. But she will, if Reluctant Immortals got her the Lambda Award for bisexual fiction, this will also, like, this should win a Lambda Award as well. It's really honest portrayal of these friendships and these girls and these growing up and their feelings and what it means when they were growing up and how people kept them apart. It was great. And they felt all so real. And going back to take the thing that ruined you and like conquering over it, there's like actual resolution here, which I really liked. It was done in a way that it was totally believable that this is actually like a neighborhood behind this veil that people couldn't see. So really fun. It's about, suburban malaise as much as it's like X-Files. So definitely worth reading.
I cannot wait for this one.
Yeah, that sounds great. Do you want to just, I don't have marches, so you guys can just do however you want to do it.
Emily, do you have another one you want to talk about?
Yeah, I have two for March. The first one is Bury Your Gaze, an anthology of tragic queer horror. And this is edited by Sophia Ajram, who is sort of newer in the horror space, and they're just really cool. They actually incidentally also made my wedding ring because they're an incredibly talented jeweler. It's a very small and strange world. This is honestly like everything we said about anthologies earlier on stands. And this one, I was looking at the table of contents and I was like, okay, this is Cassandra Caw, this is Joe Koch, this is Gretchen Felker Martin, this is August Clark, this is tons of names I don't even know. And that's, again, going back to that sort of tasting menu idea. I was like, great, I can introduce myself to all of these people I've never heard of who I want to watch, who I want to follow their careers. And I like the framing of it too, is tragic queer horror, right? This is like, obviously the sort of the bury your gaze trope is people responding to depictions in media where queer people cannot be happy and stay that way, right? They might have a partner and like one of them dies tragically and it's used as sort of like fuel for the plot line and it just gets really old. And so this is a subversion of that. It's like, okay, we're actually going to embrace that like not every story does end happily. And we're going to give, make space for that. And so I'm really excited to see where they go with this.
And to quickly disambiguate, I think Chuck Tingle's book is also called Bury Your Gaze, right? So this is different than that. Yes. So I just want to make sure that people are aware we're talking about.
That's coming out after the book.
Yes. Yeah, that one comes out in July. Yeah.
Yeah. So that'll be next round, maybe. But I just wanted to, because I know that that's also a book that is getting, attention. So different. This is the anthology, not the Chuck Tingle book.
And Becky, do you want to do your other March pick?
Yeah, I'm going to go quick on this. So this is Cynthia Pelayo's third book in her Chicago fairy tales retelling, but it's also very important. This is her first book with Thomas Mercer, so it's a big publisher. I had the unique experience and I know Cynthia, and so I got to read this book before it went out to publishers and see the different version it became after Thomas Mercer's editors looked at it. And I loved the the premise didn't change, but I thought I wasn't going to be happy with the new version, but I am. I loved it. I'm giving it a star in the January issue of Library Journal. Here's the thing: same format she usually does. There's a mystery, but there's also a fairy tale. In this case, it's The Little Mermaid, but also there's Chicago history. And I know Rob probably knows this, but a lot of people don't know that one of the worst shipwreck incidences ever happened in the Chicago River, and it's the Eastland disaster, and it was extremely tragic. And I'm not going to give away what it is. Those of you who, like Rob and I, live in the Chicago area know about it, but it's really good to learn about it because she treats it with, she always does with history, the grace, the love she gives to the people whose lives were lost. In this book, you can feel it. You can feel the love for all of these victims whom really history have forgotten, really, outside of Chicago. The original, it's called Forgotten Sisters. The original title was Funeral at Clark Street Bridge. So that is where some of this takes place. And a main character is Anna. It's all from her point of view, except for a few chapters from a detective's point of view. And it's set in the present with those links to the past. She has a podcast where she talks about ghosts and histories. There's these wonderful things that are nods to like how important ghost stories are, that they always have some fact in them. And it's just so much love, but also so much creepiness and death. It's two sisters, Anna and Jenny, and I believe the other sister's Jenny. I could get that wrong. Yeah, Jenny. And they live alone in this tiny little house on the Chicago River that has been in only a few families' histories. It's like an original Sears house. It's little, it's on the river, and it's surrounded by these larger buildings. And they meticulously keep track of the house. The sister's obsessed with old recording things. The sister takes care of, like, people send them like her old phonograph machines and she fixes them. Anna, our narrator, is very much about the history of the house. Then this is true, like in Children of Chicago, especially of young men, are being found on the river. And this actually happens in Chicago a lot. Every time there's a new body, I text her and we talk about it. And there's, she's looking into the true history. I know it's really, and so there's a story about maybe why it's happening. And there's a lot of love for these people who've gone missing too, which is very nice. She treats it with a lot of grace and love. And so there's the story about who's killing them. Why are they dying? Why is everything seeming to lead back to their house? There's a tragedy in their own life. And it all comes together in like this beautiful scene that you're just going to want to start crying. And there are real ghosts in this story, as well as the historical deaths. So it's beautiful and riveting
You told me about this book when we sat down back in March to talk about like second half of 2023. You were telling me about this book and I was like, so I've been anticipating it for like 9 months at this point. And I'm like banging on my desk at this point, like, give me this book. Oh, so good. Actually, weird sidebar is that my first job ever was working for a friend of the family who repaired and resold antique phonographs.
Oh, you'll love this then.
So I can't wait. I'll buy 2 copies.
I will just say that I don't make it out to a lot of book events locally, but every time I do, not only is she there, but she is the most enthusiastic person, and she's very social, and it just strikes me as just like someone who's so passionate about this community that she's like a part of, the writing community and horror specifically.
Chicago. She just loves Chicago.
And Chicago. So like, I know I can just count on, I'll just be like, I'll just get to an event and I'll just kind of settle in and I'll be like, there she is. And she seems so nice. But I'm not at the point where, cause she probably has no idea who I am. I have not introduced myself to her yet.
She is so nice.
We'll make that happen.
Yeah.
We'll make that happen, Rob.
But yeah, very positive impression of her just as a person, outside of the fact that, you know, like obviously the writing is a whole different thing. Yeah. That's all I got. You want to move on to another?
Emily has another one. Yeah.
I have one more for March. This is another one I have not read. It's Mouth by Joshua Hull. And this caught my attention, because the pitch is great. It's about a man who inherits some land from like a strange old guy, and he discovers that
Oh,
there
yeah.
is a mouth in the ground, a literal mouth, like a mouth with teeth in the ground on this plot of land. And he is somehow now the caretaker of this mouth. And then he sort of bonds with this like younger woman who lives nearby into sort of like investigating how and why this came to be. And the other reason that this caught my attention is that the author was the screenwriter of one of my favorite indie movies of last year, which was called Glorious, which is sort of it's set almost entirely in a deserted rest area bathroom. And this man who is clearly going through some shit ends up in this rest area bathroom, and a voice starts talking to him from the next stall. And there's a glory hole in the wall between the two stalls. And the guy in the next stall, who you never see, is his voice is played by J.K. Simmons, who is just a treasure. And it's short. It's like an hour and 15 minutes, and it's funny, and it executes this like absolutely incredible twist that I'm not going to spoil. I believe it's on Shudder, so if any of you are horror, it's not especially scary either. It's really more sort of like dark and intriguing. But I loved it so much that this is going to be an automatic buy for me. I'm really hyped about this book.
That's awesome. J.K. Simmons, which by the way, like I've seen the pictures of him, like, you know, like lifting weights at the gym and stuff. And I'm like, that guy's got a lot of muscles. So,
and you should,
yeah, he does. You should go first for April since you didn't have mine.
I'm gonna. So my April, I just have one April pick, and it is First Light by Liz Caron. Her debut novel came out in 2023, called Night's Edge. And that is, this First Light book is the sequel to Night's Edge. Night's Edge, basically, this really, it's a vampire book, but really it's about this mother-daughter relationship where, the daughter is hiding the family's dark secret, which is that her mom's a vampire, and, she has to give her own blood to sustain her mom. And she basically like forfeits her having a normal life in order to kind of keep things okay and make sure that her mom is protected from what could happen if she's found out. So as much as there's vampires involved, it's really this really focused mother-daughter relationship story, and talking about like what the lengths will go to protect the people in our lives, and really like, you know, having someone who's not the best mom, taking advantage of you and things like that, plus vampires. And so I really enjoyed that. It was one of my episodes in 2023. And this sequel is shaping up to be more of almost kind of revengey, where the person who got her mom into this situation is still out there, and she goes looking for him. So I enjoyed the Night's Edge book. I thought it was well done, and it does that thing where it makes it more about the characters than the weird thing that, you know, kind of like supports the book. And I love it when really I just care about the characters, even if some of them are vampires. And so that got me hooked, and I've just been looking forward to the sequel since then.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think my initial pitch for her first book was a woman and her mom who is both an emotional vampire and an actual vampire.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read that one too. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That's all I got for April. So it's up to you.
That's interesting, because I'm going to do my second one first then, because it's marketed as a vampire book, but it's not really. So it's Bless Your Heart by Lindy Ryan. And okay, first of all, I really enjoyed this book. On the cover, there's fangs and stuff, and I just don't think it does it justice, because it is a Southern story. Like, if you like Grady Hendrix, it's a Southern story, it's a family story, and Rachel Harrison, you're going to love this story. So it's 1999. It's a small town in Southeast Texas where everyone knows everybody else's business, hence the title, Bless Your Heart. And the Evans women run the only funeral parlor, and they have for generations, okay? So currently we have the matriarch Ducey, who's 80. She's assisted by her daughter and her granddaughter, and then they have their teenaged great-granddaughter. So when the town gossip, which is really fun, right, is the first person that we encounter. She's literally being brought to the funeral parlor. This is like the first scene. She comes back from the dead, literally rising out of her coffin, right, like hours before the visitation. But here's the thing: the Evans women, those three I mentioned, the teenagers not there then, do what they have for generations. They protect the town from the powerful ancient strigoi, Strigoi. It's like they're like an ancient undead kind of vampire, more like a ghoul, right? So they stake her through the heart. And that's it. They're like, okay, that's what we do. Blah, 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 blah. This is the start of a violent string of ever emboldening attacks. And as the bodies pile up, it's getting harder and harder for the Evans women's to deny that the onslaught may be tied to Luna, who's that youngest. And that's really important. That becomes important. And this is the point where they're supposed to be telling her what the family business is anyway. Because it's like when you, she was born like 15 years ago, or she's 16. So they were going to have to tell her anyway, and they waited a little too long. We get the multiple points of view from all four women and well-developed, utterly unforgettable cast of characters, including the hapless people, the law enforcement. And what I love about this story is it's a Southern story of these women who are beating back both the ghouls and their family secrets. It's got Southern charm, really dark humor. But like, I didn't want to not visit them again. It is closed, but there is a chance we could go back because, I mean, there's still women there. There's still the town. They go through these cycles where this happens and it's all explained and the world is great. It's violent, by the way. Do not like the Southern charm is great, but there's like people getting like eaten and stuff. But it is just perfect. Bless Your Heart is like the perfect title.
That sounds amazing.
It sounds really fun, and boy, just to hear you talk about it, the cover really does not do it justice, huh?
No, the cover's terrible.
Yeah, they're going for that sort of like illustrated, cutesy, like women's fiction romance look, and that doesn't sound like it's going to match at all.
So frustrated. Yeah, we'll see. It's Rachel Harrison mixed with Grady Hendrix, like perfectly.
Aw.
Amazing.
I love them both.
So my first pick for April is Indian Burial Ground by Nick Medina. I believe it was his first novel, was Sisters of the Lost Nation. And he does this very sort of like focused on Native peoples living on the reservation, and writes these sort of mythologically inflected stories that also address like the issues that contemporary natives living on reservations deal with. Lack of resources, alcoholism, knowing everybody else's business and not being able to escape it. So I'm only a couple of chapters into this one so far, but it opens quite literally with a bang, with a woman who's driving to work at the local casino, and a man runs out in front of her car and is killed. And we sort of immediately jump over to the friend of the dead guy who learns of his death like in the second chapter and is having a hard time coping with it. And her uncle has just come back to the reservation for a visit. And he seems to know more about what's going on than he's really willing to let on just yet. And it gets into, strange things start happening all around this community. A young man has died, and at his wake, he sits up in his coffin and speaks, and then, collapses back dead again. And there's a character who is basically homebound, but kind of watches everything going on and like gives sort of cryptic hints to the main character. And I'm really enjoying it so far. And I also love the title. I mean, that sort of cheeky reclamation of the trope of the Indian burial ground is like, I can't wait to see where he goes with this. Also a fantastic cover on this one.
It's a great cover, and I got to interview him for like a library journal event, and I was like, I love how you take the things that are stereotypes, because the first one had like the casino, right?
Yeah.
And you take the trope and you reclaim it without being like, see what I'm doing? Like he just does. And he's really good. I'm going to be reading that one in a few weeks for a review. I'm very excited.
Yeah, the first book was about, missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so this, it's very much like we are dealing with real shit here, but like I'm going to kind of sneak it into your, sandwiched in a good story, which is just always a feat.
Mm-hmm. I have another one. I'm going to be really quick because it's the Eric LaRocca collection that's coming out in April called This Skin Was Once Mine, Other Disturbances. I read this. You'll be able to read my review by the time this comes out for free on Library Journal because it is a star. It is, I just think one of the things I say in the review is he's a viral sensation for all the right reasons. I think that the thing about Eric LaRocca, these stories are shocking. They are violent. Like these are all things right? But like you read them and you were like, this is horrible. I can't stop reading this. And there's one story in there. I believe it's the very last line of the book, I'm not going to give it away, is one of the very best last lines of a book, let alone the story that I've ever read. I loved it. But one of the stories in the middle, the second to the end, is about this store where this guy goes to buy a knife, but it turns out the guy who owns the store is part of this like weird cult of people who like insert glass into themselves to feel the pain. And then they have to like get someone else to do it. And it just can't stop reading it, even though you should. This is why I think he's doing such a great job. And I feel like even though they're awful things and the pages fly by, you don't like yourself for liking it, but you do. But there's a lot of universal truths that are unveiled, which by taking sort of that mundanity of life and taking it a little bit outside, there's a lot you can get from there. I really love how their stories are thought-provoking, they're resonant, and I think that they're necessary in what we have as kind of a prudish publishing landscape. That the reason people are drawn to his stories is because he pushes those envelopes, but the universal truths are there. And this is excellent. I know he has a novel coming out also later in the year with Titan. This is part of like a deal with Titan. This one, another great cover also.
Yep.
But again, all the trigger warnings, it comes with a trigger warning at the beginning from him saying, you need to check on yourself if you're reading this book, like please. But anyway, read it.
We're in May, so you can go, Rob.
Cool. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So for May, actually, I just wanted one quick note about Eric LaRocca because I was listening to him on, I think This Is Horror, talking about the reissue of Everything the Darkness Eats. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I thought was really great about that, which kind of, makes me kind of puts in perspective to me, what he's about, was like he redid the ending of that book. And I think if I remember correctly, and if I didn't hear this right, please correct me, but like one of the things that he was changing it for was because the original ending was a little too optimistic. And so because he likes to examine and explore the dark stuff. And it sounds like he really finds value in looking at the suffering and the hard things that we go through and that we have to endure. And it just tickled me that he went as far as to update his book because for that reason, at least if I heard that right. So I thought that was worth noting because that to me kind of broadly defined kind of what he's about, but probably explains why he's so good at doing it because he's really dedicated to it. So, all right, May, I have one. This is an author I have not read before, but I liked elements of what I read about this book, so I chose it, The House That Horror Built. First of all, it's got that kind of classic title that you would see, and even like the cover kind of evokes like a classic horror movie title kind of thing. But the general idea being this person is working at this old mansion that is owned by a movie director, and so it's full of all these like props and everything, and there's like a place you can't go in, and like they think they start hearing things from behind the door. So it's like a real classic setup. It's not, it sounds like the story we've all heard before. But there's just elements in there that I'm really attracted to. I like the idea of the employee who doesn't know what they're in for. I like the idea of old mansions. And for some reason, and there's so many examples of this, movies or people who create movies or lore about movies or whatever it is really tie in well with horror stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like one of those, it's like a chocolate chip cookie recipe. It's got all these things that sound good to me. And that's what kind of drew me to this book. But like, I don't know, like it just seems like a setup that I'd like. And then I don't know if you guys know anything about Christina Henry or have any thoughts about this book specifically, but that's what drew me into wanting to read this.
Yeah, I don't know more about it than the synopsis, but yeah, that's always a movie tie-in into fiction is always going to be a good sell for me.
Yeah. Yep. That's all I've got for May, so I will hand it over.
I'll do. Oh, you want to go, Emily? Go.
I'm so excited. I'm cheating a little bit because I did just I did a year-end wrap-up episode of Talking Scared that aired on December 19th, and that was a blast. And we talked about some of our most anticipated for 2024, and I wasn't going to repeat any, but I have to talk about this book in as many places as I possibly can. It's The Z Word by Lindsay King Miller.
I'm about to read it for review myself.
Oh, Becky, I'm so excited for you. I fell in love with this book. It is Lindsay's debut novel. It is about a woman, sort of like awkward, slightly lost woman who has moved to this small town in Arizona and has recently totally fucked up her relationship with her girlfriend, and they've broken up. And so she's trying to get through Pride weekend with her like dignity and self-esteem mostly intact, because as with so many queer communities, her girlfriend is invited to all the same parties she's going to, her ex-girlfriend, excuse me. And then a zombie outbreak happens. And it's not classic zombies. It's, to say too much about that would be a spoiler, but things go very, very wrong very, very quickly. And she has to sort of rely on this, found family queer community to get herself through and to save as many people as they can. And the tagline is something like, the first Pride was a riot, the last Pride will be a bloodbath, which is very accurate. It is a very like gory and devastating and violent book, but it's also really funny and really touching in a lot of ways. There were a couple character deaths that like really got to me. It made me cry. But there's also one of my favorite characters in any book in recent memory, who is the non-binary stoner pizza delivery person named Sunshine, who is a perfect exemplar of one of my all-time favorite character tropes, which is like the unexpected prepper. It's not a prepper exactly, like they weren't preparing for the apocalypse, they just happened to be perfectly well suited to surviving it. Yeah. And like entirely, like they're like driving around in a delivery car decked out with like a flamethrower and like barbed wire on the hood, and they're just out there delivering pizzas in the apocalypse, and I love them so much. It also manages to be this really great indictment of rainbow capitalism. There is like a sinister corporate sponsor involved in this Pride event. So there's a message there as well, but like it does not get in the way of a rip-roaring good time of a story. It is such a great book, and it has a glorious cover, and I'm not going to shut up about it forever, pretty much.
It does have a cool cover. I've seen it.
Yeah, I got excited about that when I read the synopsis for it.
So did I, and that's why I requested it to review. It was because Emily's list made it sound so good.
Oh, it's so good.
So I'm going to talk about one of the most anticipated books of like the year of like the last 4 years. It's The Angel of Indian Lake by Stephen Graham Jones, and Rob got mad that I stole this one, but
you're better suited to talk about it.
You can read my review by the time this comes out, a star review in the January issue of Library Journal. So what I need to tell you that you need to know is that I have said this in writing. It will be in writing. Like Stephen Graham Jones has given us a gift. This is an epic tale for the ages. It ends exactly perfectly. It's a high-octane violent slasher. It's also a frank and thought-provoking indictment of America, past and present. It's for any reader, especially those who love horror, who like books that stay true to their genre roots by always striving to let readers see themselves and their reality and its terror. This is everything you want from the story. So, we had the first book, My Heart is a Chainsaw, was narrated exclusively by Jade. The middle book, Don't Fear the Reaper, was Jade and Letha and a few others. And this one is back to Jade again. And I really like that symmetry, the closure. We needed those other voices in the middle book. So again, every book is 4 years apart. And I happen to have the blessing of reading this book on literally the day it is set. I finished it on November 1st, 2023, which is the day the book ends. I did not do that on purpose.
Wow.
Nobody else can do that. I'm sorry, because it'll be past. But this one is set around Halloween. So there's been the massacres in the first two books. And I do not want to give away a lot. It brings everything together. There are a lot of people who die. Okay, it's a high body count. But it brings back every mythology from Drowned Town to the angel, to those characters who died in the very first scene in the very first book. I mean, one of the things I love about Graham Jones writes is that every detail matters.
Yeah.
And it is an absolutely emotionally draining book, but it's also high octane. And the thing I love about it is, and like you can tell that Stephen is a girl dad on his own, because Jade has grown so much. She knows who she is after her second stint in prison. She's embraced her native heritage. She is finding herself and who she truly is outside of the way the world has defined her. And that was also awesome. Perfect. I cannot wait to buy all three together, like again, like buy them all again in some kind of box set. So it will be everything you expected. And it's wonderful.
I can't wait.
I have to say, really excited that he honors like the actual first blood, because
he does.
Because who does that? The first blood is just like a scene setting. It's not something that's supposed to be like, integral. So that's fantastic.
And every character who's been and died in previous books, I mean, has their not that they all come back or something,
right.
But the stories are all brought back and everything. It's truly one book in 3 parts. It really is.
And I heard that you're gonna cry. So
so you're gonna cry. Like if you don't cry, you're a monster yourself.
Before we move away from this, relevant to the podcast, and I have not announced this yet, but I have episodes planned where me and my friend Jesse Lawrence, who, for people who don't know, I call him Steven's little brother. He's like been the big Steven fanboy since Steven was writing, like before Demon Theory, probably. He's been there the whole time. He's like the ride or die Steven enthusiast.
He's adorable.
And he's awesome. He's just the greatest guy, but he's so knowledgeable about Steven stuff. So him and Greg Green are joining me. We're doing 3 episodes. We're doing a deep dive into each book. So we're going to do in January a deep dive into My Heart is a Chainsaw. February, we're going to do a deep dive into Don't Fear the Reaper. And then March, we're going to do a deep dive into The Angel of Indian Lake. And from what I understand, maybe there's a publication date change, so it might be a little bit. It was supposed to
be in March, and now it's May. Yes.
Yeah. So I think we're going to stick to the schedule. But I'm really excited because I read Don't Fear the Reaper, and I was like, man, I really should have gone back and reread My Heart is a Chainsaw before I did this. And so I want to honor the trilogy by having not only reread the books, but had a deep dive discussion about them as well. So that's the plan right now for the podcast.
Well, I gave you free advertising.
Yeah, there we go. And Stephen is supposed to be sending me an arc. We'll see how that goes. So,
I have an extra one. I can get it to you if you need it.
We'll talk. It's not because he'll be like, yeah, of course, this makes sense. But then when it gets to a publisher, they have different ideas sometimes. So we'll see. But I'm very excited for that. Yes.
Emily,
did you have another May, yes. Emily?
I do. And this is a book that I don't know a goddamn thing about, except for what I have read on the synopsis. It is Supplication by Noor Abi Nakul. And this is from, I believe it's Penguin Random House Canada's Strange Light imprint, and they publish some interesting things. Billing itself as a literary horror novel, which I know people have strong feelings about that term, but I respect what it is going for, in that, like, okay, this is not like the blockbuster slasher. This is the, like, okay, you're gonna have a weird time and maybe come out the other side a little different. From what I can tell from the publisher's copy, it's about a woman who wakes up tied to a chair in a basement with a strange man, hovering over her. And then when she gets out into the city, she finds that it is, changed and upsetting and dangerous. And, the words that kind of get tossed around for this kind of book are hallucinatory and fever dream and nightmare. And I'm a real sucker for a well-executed, fever dream of a book. So this looks right up my alley. It sounds like she takes kind of a journey through this, like, horrifying city and encounters, good and bad people along the way. And I like a good journey narrative too. Plus the cover on this one is absolutely stunning.
Covers are important.
They really are, man. They really are.
Yeah,
I know. That's why I got upset about the Bless Your Heart. I don't think it's the right cover for this book. So, I have one more that I haven't read yet. The rest of the books I haven't read yet, but I'm set to review it. And I actually did not put it on right away because I didn't know if Emily was going to talk about it, because I heard her talking about it on Talking Scared. But it's called Ghost Roots Stories by, yes, I believe it's pronounced Penny Aguda. I am a sucker, if you couldn't tell from one of my first books, for African set horror stories. And these are set in Lagos, Nigeria, which is actually, I've read quite a few books set in Lagos because I find it fascinating. And they're stories, but they all unfold against in the same setting. They're all in Lagos. And it's uncanny. And they seem like Lauren Groff blurbed it. So I really like her work.
Oh, yeah.
And they're chilling. And it seems like a lot of women involved. So I'm really excited to get to read it, and I'll be reviewing it. I don't remember for who, but it's on my list. Also a very cool cover.
Yeah, I have a galley of this one on its way, and I'm really excited.
And I have an e-galley right now, so I'm very, I love stories, and I'm really excited to try a new author with stories. And sort of what I was saying before about novellas, I do like to have, I believe it's in my library journal column, I do like to have stories because it helps me break up. I don't want to just have 8 books that are all like a giant novel. So for people to see things. So I'm excited.
If you want a little preview of her work, Becky, do you remember the Nightfire audio anthology, Come Join Us by the Fire? She had a story in there. Yeah. So that's she's been on my radar since then. So I'm really excited about this. I'm
excited to read. I love reading entire collections by someone who's new to me. Like you mentioned earlier, the Primi Muhammad novella. And I read her story collection last year and absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to do that.
Wonderful. Well, are we into June now?
June.
Crazy.
June.
Rob, you should go first because you took the two big blockbusters.
I didn't mean to.
No, it's great. I love it. Yeah, you did a little bit about the Mallerman.
I meant to about Josh, but So so my first June one is incidents around the house, Josh Malerman, and part of it is because of my in my undying love for Josh as a person, and but honestly, like I liken him in a way, kind of, to Stephen Graham Jones in a way where, they're both prolific and they write horror and all that stuff, but like they both seem like they just are so in love with stories, and so that makes me like Josh Miller a lot. When I was talking to him about not Daphne. What's the most Spin a Black Yarn? Sorry, I just lost my mind for a second. One of the things that came up in conversation was like haunted houses, and I was like, one of the problems I have sometimes with haunting stories is the question of why don't they just leave? And when I said that, he was like, that's what my next book is about. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it, was because we had that moment where he's like, oh, let me tell you. And so basically there's it's like a young child, and I'm not going to eloquently do this, but basically the thing that hooks me about like the premise of this story is, this girl's got her family and everything, but there's also someone in the house she calls Other Mommy, and that's really creepy. And so, obviously this is like the haunting aspect. Other Mommy is this bad element in a house, and like things just get worse and worse. And so, children's perspectives, especially when things like that are happening, to me is always compelling, because again, it's that perspective that's different, and they don't, in a way, they're bolder because they don't understand to be scared necessarily. So it gives a unique perspective on what would be a traditional kind of haunting idea. But I was just kind of excited about the idea of him addressing the question of why don't they just leave. But it sounds like a really cool story.
And then you might as well do the other one too, because you have the other big book.
Oh yeah, horror.
I'm reading that one for review soon, so the next one.
I'm just going to read, because it's a really short. I'm just going to read what the publisher says about it. In June 1993, a group of young guerrilla filmmakers.
Wait, you didn't say the title. Go back. You didn't say the title.
All right, sorry. Horror movie by Paul Tremblay. And Paul, again, just one of my. I actually have a story. I've never said this publicly, but back in 2013, AWP was happening in Boston, which is where Paul lives near. I think he lives outside of Boston.
Yes.
And me and a group of people were staying at this one hotel, and we were going to have this party one night. But we were partying the night before pretty heavily, and the hotel was basically like, you guys need to cut it out. And so the next day, when everybody was going to come over for this party, Paul's like, hey, what's going on? And I had to be like, sorry, Paul, you can't come. And I felt guilty for years for like being so mean to Paul by telling him he can't come to our party. And like one of the times I had him on the podcast, I was like, Paul, this has been bothering me forever. I told you, I ditched you about this party at AWP. And he's like, he was so gracious about it. He's like, dude, I get it. I live nearby. Like, if I went to a party or not, it's no big deal. Like, he was just so nice about it. And I was like, this has literally been like weighing me down for years, that I was like not mean, but like I had to like diss one of the nicest guys. So,
he is such a mensch. He really is just a lovely guy.
He really is. He's great.
Anyway, you should read the blurb, because
I'm going to read that. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So in June 1993, a group of young guerrilla filmmakers spent 4 weeks making Horror Movie, a notorious, disturbing art house horror flick. The weird part, only 3 of the film's scenes were ever released to the public, but Horror Movie has nevertheless grown a rabid fan base. 3 decades later, Hollywood is pushing for a big budget reboot. Oh, this is longer than I thought. There was a read more. The man who played the Thin Kid is the only surviving cast member. He remembers all too well the secrets buried within the original screenplay, the bizarre events of the filming, and the dangerous cross lines on the set that resulted in tragedy. As memories flood back in, the boundaries between reality and film, past and present, start to blur. But he's going to help remake the film, even if it means navigating a world of cynical producers, egomaniacal directors, and surreal fan conventions. Demons of the past be damned. But at what cost? So that sounds nice, right?
Emily, it's up your alley with the movies and the books coming together,
Oh,
huh?
yes. Oh, yes. I'm very, very, very excited about this one.
Yeah.
And Paul does that thing where, I think I was listening to someone talk about Rachel Harrison recently, where she takes a thing and makes it her own. And I feel like when Paul approaches a trope or a section of horror, he really kind of cultivates like a very Paul perspective on it. So I'm excited about that.
I only have one. I decided to just do one for June, and because I have a good story about it. So it's called "The Eyes Are the Best Part" by Monica Kim. So here's how I learned about this book. It actually wasn't from Emily's list. I got an urgent message from Christopher Golden, who said to me, "Becky, I just read this book. I knew nothing about it. They asked me to blurb it. Oh my God, this book is great. You have to read it." So without anything else, I went straight to the publisher and I said, "Hey, Christopher Goldman told me to read this book." And I want to put it in my April column for Library Journal, which will be due. I have to read the book in February. And I also do an interview with an author every issue that I have one of my columns. I'm like, and I want to do an interview with the author. Can we do this? And they were like, that would be great. That was before I even read what it was about. I literally, this is like, there are people you trust, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I just, he literally ran to me to tell me how much he loved this book. So then I looked at the blurb. And first of all, the publisher marketing is two of my favorite books from the last 5 years. Crying in H Mart Means My Sister the Serial Killer. So it's a feminist psychological horror about the making of a female serial killer from a Korean American perspective. So I am already sold there. I don't really know what's happening, but there's going to be a female serial killer. It's going to have something to do with eyes. You can read the blurb on Emily's site because it's up there. And Christopher Golden loved it. So I'm just going to let it happen to me in February when I read it. And
yeah, I'm hearing a lot of buzz about this one. And the editor, I used to work with her at Tor, and she's she just has the most amazing taste. And so I fully expect the world from this book.
But what I like about this book, sharing this as my last book, is sometimes that's how we hear about books. I think that's important.
Yep.
Someone else tells us to read it. Emily tells me sometimes about books ahead of time, you have to read this book. Mm-hmm. I have a few that are coming up later in the year that I'm reading because she told me to. And people you trust, and people come to all three of us, to share books that they're excited about. And I literally took a chance and said, you know what, Christopher Golden told me this book is great. I'm just going to set it up. And then I went and read about it after, because I think sometimes you have to take that leap with books, especially those of us who read for a living. It can get monotonous and boring at times. And some of this pure excitement, it's a great way to recapture it. So I am excited for that one very much.
Yeah, it's very possible to get locked into your own taste, and having people you trust to be like, no, I know you never would have picked this up on your own, or you didn't know anything about it, and you're just done, sold, is such a boon. Well, I have two for June, and I'll hit them quickly because I have not read either one. The first is Youth Juice by I know, right? E.K. Satyu. And they're billing it as American Psycho meets Devil Wears Prada, and it's sort of a pitch dark satire of New York startup, it girl beauty culture. And I feel like there have been a few takes on this kind of story in the last few years, but this one seems poised to really hit different. If when the publisher copy is billing it as having outrageous body horror, I'm like, okay, this is, Soho Press is not usually in the outrageous body horror business. So I'm listening. But it's about a woman who takes a job at a luxury skincare brand, and there's something not right about it. And she's asked to test this new moisturizer that they have called Youth Juice. And there is apparently a gruesome secret ingredient in the moisturizer. So I'm very excited about this. Also a great cover, like millennial pink with like a hand holding like a cosmetic jar and like a drip of blood. And also having like spent my entire adult life before the age of like 33 in New York, you know, I was not these women, but I was around these women constantly. And so I'm drawn to those stories in a big way. And my last pick for this episode is the second traditionally published novel from someone I consider a drop dead fucking genius, Cuckoo by Gretchen Felker Martin, author of Manhunt, which I'm sure you've all heard about. This is her sort of throwback 90s conversion camp novel. And the thing about Gretchen is that, like, you're going to have a good time, but you're going to have a bad time while you're having a good time. And I mean that 1,000,000% as a compliment. So this is about a group of teenagers who are functionally like kidnapped by this, tough love conversion camp out in the Utah desert. And as they sort of are trying to muddle their way through and sort of stay true to who they are, they start to realize that the other campers are basically disappearing and being replaced by like fixed versions of themselves. Obviously, this year we had a big conversion camp horror novel in Chuck Tingle's Camp Damascus, which I also loved. And I cannot imagine a more perfect, like, polar opposite pair of authors to both take on the same subject matter. I am so, like, I'm excited, but I'm also dreading reading this because I know it's just going to rip my heart out and, like, run over it with, like, a combine tractor. But I'm signing up for it. Again, I think she is like a stone cold genius, and I am going to be like shouting from the rooftops about this one too.
It's in my review queue.
Hell yeah.
Manhunt was one that I was like, I know I need to read this. But I was like, is it where I have to be in a certain mindset to read it? And it always kept getting like kind of jostled down the reading list, but I own it, and I follow Gretchen on social media, and it's one of those things where it's like I've done everything but done the thing. But I read about Cuckoo.
Book. Yeah. It will be there for you is the beautiful thing.
Yeah. That's actually a good point about books. Is like it was mentioned earlier that that there's kind of like the promotion cycle of a new release, and then it kind of falls off of radars. But I've been hearing people in podcasts a lot lately saying your book doesn't have a expiration date. Like there's not like a day where it's no longer a book. It's always going to be there. And so, we were talking offline before we started about how I just started reading Mayfly, which came out, 6 months ago or whatever it was, because I just can't stop hearing everybody say good things about it. And I've been dying to get to it. So go back to Emily's old lists and see what's listed there. There's always resources and I actually got kind of obsessed with the idea of books that aren't talked about anymore. So I've started posting videos on my Instagram where I'm talking about books that came out like a decade ago that like, when conversations are going on, if people are talking about werewolf books, I think about Glenn Duncan's The Last Werewolf, but that came out in like 2011. God.
Yes, that book is incredible.
Right. And
I'm a big fan of Sharp Teeth by, is it Toby Barlow, I believe. Mm-hmm. That's another one I really like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I talk a lot about this on my blog because in libraries, we have the backlist. Yeah. So years ago, I used to do a talk with, there's a great bookstore in Oak Park called Open Table. And I used to go with the owner, Jason, and we would do a thing around at libraries, and we would do things like, Becky, how many Stephen King books do you have at your library? I'd be like, we have every book he's ever written. And he's like, yes. And all I have is room for the most recent 5 and the 5 most popular. And that's it. She's like, because you have the backlist. And I talk all the time about how libraries, most of our books are not on the new shelf. Whereas a bookstore, most of the books are newer.
Yeah.
And so our point is our asset is our backlist. And so what do you do when you have a great asset? You play it up. So we need to, and I have an entire like subline on my blog for librarians, what I train them about. Look backward, especially 2 to 5 years. That's a sweet spot. But even back a decade, where you probably still have those books on the shelf. They're good reads. They were, a great read for somebody at some point. It doesn't matter if it's new or not. If it's a good book for that reader, it's a great book.
Totally.
So and I will say also that in every one of my lists, so in the 2024 list, there are links to all of the previous years in that list. You don't have to go digging for them; they are right there for you.
It's why we call her an honorary librarian. She's very good at making sure that it's all and easy to get all the information we need at any time.
That is honestly like honorary, like the honor is all mine. That is like the nicest thing you could say about me.
It is, it's high praise. But you do make it incredibly easy, and we just need you to inspire other people to do the same thing for other genres. One way or another.
Man, if I could clone myself, I would do it for sci-fi and fantasy, but I only have so many hours in a day.
Definitely. We've been going over 2 hours, so we probably for the sake of like everybody's sanity, the three of us moving on with our day, we should probably wrap it up. But so for anybody that's listening, if you enjoyed this, there's going to be a bookshop.org list of everything we talked about. I think it's probably around 30 books, so there's definitely stuff to check out. This was planned where we just talked about the first half of the year. So sometime into 2024, ostensibly, we're going to do this again for the second half of 2024. For many reasons. First of all, like this took 2 hours. But also like things aren't always settled and things change and like things are out. So like I will point out, one thing I'm going to point out is that like I think minutes before we got started or hours before we got started, Gemma Amor announced a collection, I think, coming out through Cemetery Gates Media or something like that in spring.
That's great. So, I missed it. I'll add it.
But it like literally happened just a few hours ago. So these things always change. We're breaking it up into 2 halves. We'll come back and we'll do July through December. And I just want to thank both of you Becky for having the idea and for being amazing. And Emily, who has never met me and probably knew nothing about me, agreeing to do this as well. So thank you so much for taking the time. It's been fantastic.
It was really fun. Thanks, everybody.
This was great. Thank you so much, Rob.